Hello, today I'd like to share with you a simple tutorial about how to answer arterial blood gases or how to interpret the values in an ABG result. For this tutorial, I'll be using abg.ninja. It's a free website. Okay, so the first thing that I check whenever I look at the ABG values is if it's normal. So the normal values for pH or it's 7.35 to 7.45. Here it's below normal, so it's acidic. It's below 7.35. I would say put pH here. CO2, the normal value is it's 35 to 45, and it's 29. If it's below 35, it's basic. If it's more than 45, it's acidic. Since the value is 29, it's basic. So I would put PaCO2 here. HCO3 or bicarbonate, the normal value is 22 to 26. If it's lower than 22, it's acidic. If it's higher than 26, it's basic. And the value here is 13, so it means it's acidic. Okay, so both pH as well as bicarbonate are in the acid column. So if it's an HCO3, it's metabolic. If pH and CO2 fall on the same column here, it's respiratory. Okay, so pH and HCO3 use as acidosis. It's acidic, it's acidosis, and HCO3 is metabolic. Okay, metabolic acidosis. Next, let's check the level of compensation. And the way we would check this is for me to be able to answer it as none, either CO2 or HCO3 must be within the normal limits. Once again, PaCO2 or CO2 is 35 to 45, HCO3 22 to 26, and it's within abnormal limits. Oh, it's not within normal limits. So I cannot answer none. So there's some kind of compensation or adjustments to correct the acidosis, the metabolic acidosis. And if next we proceed to whether it's partial or full. The only time we would answer full if the pH is within normal limits, and our pH normal values must be within 7.35 to 7.45, and since it's 7.28 below the normal values, we would answer partial. Had it been within this normal range, we would answer full, because that means the level of compensation has been able to correct or fix the primary problem, and it's fully compensated. Here it's still within abnormal limit, so it's partial compensation. Now for this portion, we would look at this part. So if it's metabolic acidosis, the reverse or the counterpart would be respiratory alkalosis. So the reverse of metabolic is respiratory, and the reverse of acidosis is alkalosis. So it means that um, there's a problem with the metabolic or within the kidneys, and the respiratory system or the lungs is trying to compensate to correct the primary problem. Okay, so let's check if our answer is correct. See, pHs and HCO3 levels are both acidotic. So the primary mechanism is metabolic acidosis. The respiratory alkalosis is compensation of the bicarbonate, but the pH is not within normal limits, so it's only partially effective. So not full compensation. Only partially effective because it's still within the acidotic level. Let's try another one. Same drill, 7.35 to 7.45. So it pH is, uh, let's put them here first. Okay, so pH is basic, CO2 24, and the normal is 35 to 45. If it's below 35, it's basic. Okay, so I'd put PaCO2 basic here, okay, and bicarbonate 17. Normal is 22 to 26. If it's below 22, it's 17, right? Below 22, then I put it as acidotic or acidic. I'd place it here. Okay, I'd look at the placements. Basic PaCO2, and for PaCO2, it's respiratory. Now, since pH is within the basic, I would use alkalosis. So it's respiratory. Whenever you see CO2, it's comparable to uh, respiratory, and with bicarbonate, it's metabolic. So I'd use respiratory, respiratory alkalosis. Okay. Once again, I'd ask myself uh, whether there's anything here that's within the normal limit. So CO2 is supposedly 35 to 45, and bicarbonates 22 to 26, which is 17. Okay, so I cannot answer none. So there's some level of compensation. Now here, whenever we look it's partial or full, it's always the pH. Is it within the normal limit? So if it's within the normal value, 7.35 to 7.45, there's full compensation. But if it's in with still outside of the normal values, just like in this case, it's alkalotic. It's so I'd answer partial. Once again here, I'd use the counterpart of respiratory, it's metabolic, and the counterpart of alkalosis, it's acidosis. Okay, so let's check our answer. See, the pH and CO2 levels are both alkalotic. pH and CO2 are both alkalotic. So the primary mechanism is respiratory alkalosis. So if it's CO2, it's carbon dioxide, of course, it has to be expelled or excreted through the lungs, which is why it's called respiratory. Metabolic acidosis, compensation for the CO2, but the pH is not within normal limits, so it's only partially effective. Okay, so let's try another one. Okay, so 7.54, it's way above, so it's basic. Okay, pH. Our normal limit for CO2 is 35 to 45, and this is 59, so it's acidic. Okay, and bicarbonate 22 to 26, and if it's higher, it's basic. Okay. So when if it's pH plus HCO3 on the same column, it means metabolic. And since pH is alkalotic, I would answer metabolic alkalosis. Once again, question here, if there is either of these that's within normal values, I would answer none. So that means there's no compensation by the body. But since this is abnormal, so something is wrong. Next, I'd check the pH. If it's already within the normal limit, it's still an alkalosis. So I would not answer full. I'd use partial. So full means the body is able to successfully fix or compensate the primary problem and it's being corrected. There is an attempt to correct, but it's not yet effective because it's still the pH still in alkalosis. So it's partial. Next, for the compensation, always the counterpart of metabolic as well as alkalosis. So it's going to be respiratory acidosis. Let's check. See, it's correct. So you can always use this method to interpret and answer ABGs. Try another one. Okay. Here, 7.35 to 7.45. Now notice 7.35, this is 7.36, which means pH is within the normal limit, normal values. CO2 is 62, more than 45, it's acidic. See, it's acidic, okay. And bicarbonate, 22 to 26. If it's 34, it's basic. Okay, so here, notice we don't have two on the same column. So what we're gonna do here is look at the pH value. 7.36. It's leaning towards acidic. And what's acidic here? It's the CO2. So we would use acidosis. And since acid is PaCO2, its pH and CO2 means respiratory. So I would use respiratory acidosis. Once again, we would look at whether there's a normal value here. Normal values 35 to 45. For this one, 22 to 26, so we cannot use none because there's some levels. It's abnormal, so there's some level of compensation. Now we look at the pH to answer whether it's partial or full. Once again, if it's full, that means the body is able to fix the primary problem successfully and corrected it to within the normal limit. So here our normal values for pH is 7.35, so 7.45, and the pH here 7.36, which means it's within the normal limit or values. I'd answer full. Here the reverse of respiratory is metabolic, and the reverse of acidosis is alkalosis. And let's check. Okay, so our answer is correct. The pH is at the low end of normal towards the acidotic side, right? Towards the acidotic, it's 7.36. It's almost acidic. But the HCO3 and CO2 levels indicate something abnormal is happening because the body generally doesn't overcompensate. The acidotic factor is the primary culprit. The acidotic factor is the primary culprit. Acidotic factor of the pH 7.36, and so there's a respiratory acidosis because of pH plus PaCO2 is respiratory. Had it been bicarbonate, would have been metabolic. Okay. And the normal pH means it has been fully compensated. So it's back to normal. The others are not yet normal, but there was a successful compensation to bring back the pH to the normal level. And because of the metabolic alkalosis. So it's like a tug of war. If there's a problem with the respiratory, then the compensation would come from the kidneys or metabolic. If there's a problem with metabolic, then the compensation would be coming from the respiratory to even out or to balance the values. Okay, so let me try last one. 7.35, this is acidic. 7.35, okay. 35 to 45, 59. So this is also acidic. See, 35 to 45 acidic. And this is 59. Our bicarbonate, notice, it's 22 to 26, so it's within normal limit. It's 26. Our bicarbonate is normal. Okay. We'd look at PaCO2 as well as pH. This means it's acidosis. There's an acidosis. And carbon dioxide, respiratory. Okay. Here, as mentioned, we would look at these two. Either of these must be within normal limit. And we have here bicarbonate within normal, which is up to 26. And the answer is, and the value is 26, which means there was no compensation done by the body. So I would answer this one. Uncompensated respiratory acidosis. You would not be answering this portion since there's no compensation at all. At least in this ABG values, when the blood gases were drawn, there was no compensation. It's uncompensated. So the answer would be only up to this. There's none. Let's check. The pH and CO2 levels are both acidotics. The primary mechanism is respiratory acidosis. Respiratory, pH, and PaCO2 equals respiratory. HCO3 is normal, so there is no indication of metabolic compensation. So that's what we have to remember whenever we're looking at the ABGs. Actually, you can use this one. You can just have to arrange, is it acidic or normal, basic, 7.35, and the normal values. And if it's CO2, it's respiratory. The way I remember CO2, the normal values is it's the same, almost the same as the pH. Just drop the 7. 7.35, the normal is 35. 7.45, the normal is 45. Just drop the 7. Just the decimal points. So what I only have to remember differently is for the bicarbonate, which is 22 to 26. Okay, that's it for today. You can review this tutorial. Play it again to make sure you understand. If you have questions, uh, feel free to comment down below. Thank you.